Let's look at 5 tips to make your coffee at home instantly better. Hi, I'm Peter from Coffee Parts, and let's get into it. First things first, the coffee. I always suggest it's best to buy coffee from your local roaster or a cafe that's supplying coffee from your local roaster. Not only are you shopping small and helping the local businesses, but you're getting a fresher product. And coffee does have somewhat of a small lifespan. I like to buy coffee that will last 1 to say 3 weeks. So if you're drinking 250 grams of coffee a week, you don't really want to be buying more than half a kilo. And when you're buying coffee, it's nice to get coffee that's been packed in a pouch bag like this, where you've got a ziplock and a one-way valve that lets the coffee degas without any oxygen coming in, meaning that the coffee is going to last a lot longer. If you are buying a bigger bag, say 1 kilo bag that doesn't have a ziplock, you can always get coffee storage containers, which you put in your coffee and you seal them up. Once again, they got a one-way valve to let them degas. So that's an alternative, but you can always just get coffee that comes in a pouch bag, and that storage is gonna be nice and fresh for you for longer. Talking about storage, when you do have it at home, you wanna store it away from sunlight. So just think about your dark kitchen cupboard. Now, when it comes to that coffee, while it's in the bag, it's gonna store a lot longer than say in your coffee hopper off the grinder. So when it comes to dosing coffee into the hopper, you don't want to dose too much coffee because it's going to store better in your bag, and you don't want to dose too little coffee because it's going to popcorn and not give you as even coffee ground as possible. So there's a happy medium depending on how many coffees you're drinking. You want enough for the amount of coffees you're going to be drinking that day and not too much that's going to be sitting there for a while. And that leads on to tip number 2, the grinder. Now, having a grinder is crucial. You don't want to be buying pre-ground coffee because pre-ground coffee is oxidized a lot quicker. It's not going to last as long, and it probably won't be ground to your machine. With a grinder, you can normally have infinite movement. So if it's a stepless grinder, so you want to grind it, you want to be grinding fresh. Whereas a little hand grinder, a better grind on demand grinder, or a really good top end grinder, just having a grinder makes the world of difference. Talking about a grinder, a lot of grinders, and not all, have a certain amount of retention of coffee. And that means once you've ground coffee, it's gone in through the chute, out through the burrs, and there's a chamber around it. That chamber will always have a percentage of coffee. Think of it like a gram. And if you're grinding out 20 grams, that means 5% of your coffee is going to be pre-ground from the previous grind. So there's a simple way around this. You can grind out a small amount of coffee. Depending on your grind, it might be just by hitting a button or setting your single dose to just say 1 second and your double dose to your actual grind amount. There are grinders, single dose grinders, that will grind only what you put in. That's a different story. They won't have any retention, but on these grinders, it's nice to grind out a small amount. That second coffee you're doing straight away, you obviously wouldn't do that because the coffee's fresh. Bear in mind though, if you're doing coffee back to back, obviously you're not going to grind out a gram of coffee on that second coffee because the coffee's fresh. It's more if you're having coffee from the previous day, you don't want that pre-ground. Yes, I know it's a little bit of wastage, but we're talking about tips to make your coffee better. Now, this tip's not necessarily going to help you make better coffee, but if you're OCD like me and you don't like grounds coffee on your bench, it's going to make the world of difference. And that's getting a dosing collar. Something like this, it's magnetically connected to your portafilter. And what that means is when you're grinding coffee, there's less chance of it falling outside your portafilter and onto your bench. So what we're going to do is grind out that 1 second, which we're going to throw out, just to get rid of any retention that was in that grinder. Just getting rid of that. And now we're going to grind out 18 grams, or what I've dialed this grinder to do, 18 grams of coffee to do our coffee. So that dosing collar really does help things keep neat. An alternative to the dosing collar could be grinding into a dosing cup and then transferring it to your portafilter. That would also help a little bit in the distribution and keep the workbench nice and clean. Now this leads me on to tip number 3, having a coffee scale. Now it doesn't necessarily have to be a coffee scale, it can be any kitchen scale, as long as it goes to 1/10 of a gram, because it's important to know the difference between 18 grams, 18.1 or 17.9. And generally coffee scales react a little bit faster, but any scale will do. Now the idea is, we're looking for 18 grams, and it's 18 grams. We've also dialed it in before, but when you're dialing in, it really helps having a scale, because sometimes you don't, if you're grinding out a small difference, let's say 17.8, then 18, 18.1, and you're also adjusting the grind, you don't know where that variance is coming from. Is it your grind adjustment or the weight of coffee? So keeping the weight consistent makes life a lot easier, and it gets rid of one variable, so you know one less variable in dialing in that grinder. Just a simple thing, you don't have to buy one, you might already have one, but just remembering to weigh your coffee, it does get rid of one main variable. And that leads me on to tip number 4, which is distributing and tamping your coffee. Now, there's many ways to distribute your coffee, and not everyone likes to distribute, but you can use anything from a paperclip, a spoon, or a little WDT tool like this. And the main aim is just to move that coffee around, so you're basically mixing the fines and the boulders, making everything a bit more even so you get less channeling. Depending on who you see online, there's different talks. Sometimes people don't like stabbing the coffee or whatever it might be. The main aim is just to move that coffee around. When it comes to tampers, it's important to get the right size tamper for your portafilter. In this case, the Gadget Classic, which uses a 58mm portafilter and a 58mm tamper. Generally, you can go 58.3, so a bit wider, because really you want to go as wide as possible in that surface area. In this case, we're using a 58.5, but it pulls back. If you're going to go really close to the edge, you need that lip to pull back in so you're not getting that suction. And once again, it's not just the size, but it's the radius that matters. So if you have a sharper radius, also on a bigger size, you're gonna tap a lot more of it. If it's quite a curved radius, technically it might be 58, but you might only be tamping 57mm because of that radius. So bear that in mind, you wanna tap right to the edge. You wanna push down, keep it nice, even and flat, give it a polish, and there you go. And that's tamping. Now we wanna lock it into the machine and extract your coffee. And that leads me on to tip number 5. Simple tip, but it's to always have your portafilter on the machine till you're ready to grind and tamp. Because you want the portafilter to be hot and also your cups to be hot by just sitting on top of the machine. So when you're making coffee, you're not depleting temperature through the portafilter and through the cups. If you were to have cold cups and cold portafilter, your coffee would end up quite cold. So now that we've done these 5 simple little tips, let's lock it in and see how the extraction looks. Now on part 2 of this video, we'll deep dive a little bit further and look at not only coffee scale to weigh in, but coffee scale to weigh out, so you can look at the ratios of coffee, and also things like water quality, what TDS of water, water temperature, and pump pressure. But we'll leave that for part 2. For now, let's try this coffee. For a relatively entry-level machine, it really is a nice coffee. So my question to you is, what's your simple little tip to make better coffee at home? Let me know in the comments below. And like always, if this video has brought you value, hit that thumbs up. And if you haven't yet, please subscribe. Thank you and see you on part 2.